You're about to step into 1692 Salem, Massachusetts, where the air tastes like fear mixed with unwashed bodies, and the local entertainment involves watching your neighbours get hanged for allegedly hexing the butter. The stench of paranoia hangs thicker than the smoke from poorly ventilated fireplaces, and trust me, you're not ready for what passes as justice in this Puritan fever dream. Welcome to a place where sneezing at the wrong moment could literally get you killed, and where being different isn't just frowned upon, it's a death sentence wrapped in religious righteousness. Hello, before you settle in, I'd truly appreciate it if you'd take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I'm sharing here. It means so much to me. Also, please share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm always touched to see how we're all coming together from across the globe. Now let's create a calm space. Lower the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for a gentle hum, and let's begin this journey together. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about what it really meant to wake up every morning in Salem Village during the witch trials. Spoiler alert, it wasn't the quaint colonial fantasy you see in your Instagram-worthy autumn photos. You're living in a world where your morning routine starts with checking if you're still breathing. Because honestly, that's not guaranteed anymore. The roosters crow at dawn, assuming they haven't been accused of being Satan's alarm clock, and you roll out of whatever passes for a bed, which is basically a straw mattress that's seen more bodily fluids than a medieval emergency room. The smell hits you first. A cocktail of unwashed human, animal waste, rotting vegetables, and that special blend of wood smoke and desperation that defines your entire existence. Your house, if you can call 4 walls and a prayer a house, is smaller than most modern walk-in closets. You share this palace with however many family members haven't died from disease, been accused of witchcraft, or simply given up on life. Privacy, what's that? You're basically living in a human terrarium where everyone knows when you scratch your ass and judges you for it. The floorboards creak like they're announcing your every move to the neighbourhood witch hunting committee. Speaking of which, yes, there's always someone watching, always someone listening, always someone ready to point a finger and scream, "Witch!" because you looked at their cow funny and now it won't give milk. In Salem, paranoia isn't just a mental health issue, it's a survival skill. Let's talk about breakfast, shall we? You're not exactly hitting up the local Starbucks for a pumpkin spice latte. Your morning meal consists of whatever mouldy bread you can scrape together, maybe some porridge that tastes like it was filtered through a horse, and if you're really lucky, some ale that's probably safer to drink than the water. The water, by the way, comes from sources that also serve as community toilets, garbage dumps, and corpse washing stations. Bon appetit. But here's where it gets fun. And by fun, I mean absolutely terrifying. You can't just eat your sad breakfast in peace. Oh no. Every bite has to be taken with the knowledge that if someone's having a bad day, they might decide your eating habits are suspiciously witch-like. Chewing too loudly. Witch behaviour. Not finishing your porridge. Obviously communing with dark forces. Enjoying your food. That's definitely Satan's influence making you feel pleasure. The Puritan lifestyle is basically like being trapped in the world's worst reality TV show, except instead of getting voted off the island, you get hanged from a tree. Everything is sinful. Everything is suspect. Everything is potentially witch-related. You can't dance. You can't sing. You can't laugh too hard. You can't cry too much. You can't wear bright colours. You can't show skin. You can't have fun. And you definitely can't express any personality whatsoever. It's like living under the world's most oppressive HOA, except the penalty for violations is death. Your daily routine revolves around work, prayer, and trying not to do anything that might be construed as supernatural. You wake up, you pray. You work, you pray. You eat, you pray. You shit, you probably pray. You go to bed, you pray. It's like being stuck in the world's most boring video game where the only options are pray or die horribly. The work, by the way, is backbreaking. If you're a man, you're probably farming with tools that would make modern gardeners weep. You're breaking your back over soil that's about as cooperative as a hangover on a Monday morning, trying to grow enough food to keep your family from starving. The farming tools are basically medieval torture devices disguised as agricultural equipment. Your hands are constantly raw, bleeding and infected because gloves are for the wealthy, and antiseptic won't be invented for another couple hundred years. If you're a woman, congratulations, your job is even worse. You get to do all the cooking, cleaning, child rearing and household management, while also helping with the farm work when needed. You're basically running a one-woman show in conditions that would make a modern survivalist cry. Your kitchen is a fire hazard waiting to happen, with open flames and grease everywhere. Your laundry day involves hauling water from questionable sources, boiling it over dangerous fires, and scrubbing clothes by hand until your knuckles bleed. Your cleaning supplies consist of whatever harsh soaps you can make from animal fat and ash, assuming you can get animal fat and don't accidentally poison yourself making soap. But wait, there's more. You also get to birth and raise children in an environment where half of them won't make it to their 5th birthday. Childhood mortality is through the roof because medicine consists of bleeding people, praying, and hoping for the best. Got a fever? Let's drain some blood and see what happens. Broken bone? Pray harder. Mysterious illness? Must be witchcraft. And speaking of children, they're not the innocent little angels you might imagine. Kids in Salem are basically tiny Puritan police officers, trained from birth to spot and report sinful behaviour. They're watching you, judging you, and ready to testify against you in court if they think you've been practicing witchcraft. Your own children might be the ones to turn you in. Family loyalty? Not really a thing when eternal salvation is on the line. The children who started the whole witch trial mess were probably just bored out of their minds and discovered that screaming about witches got them attention. Imagine being so starved for entertainment that accusing your neighbours of devil worship becomes your favourite pastime. These kids figured out that they could literally get adults killed by throwing fits and pointing fingers. Talk about taking "the customer is always right" to its logical extreme. But let's get back to your daily grind. The weather doesn't care that you're already miserable. Winter in Massachusetts is like being slowly murdered by Jack Frost himself. Your house has the insulation properties of a screen door, and your heating system consists of a fireplace that's more likely to burn your house down than keep you warm. You're wearing every piece of clothing you own, which isn't much, and you're still cold enough to see your breath indoors. The firewood situation is its own special hell. You can't just flip a switch and get heat. You have to chop wood, which means going into forests where wild animals want to eat you, and other humans might accuse you of witchcraft for being alone in the woods. The wood has to be properly seasoned, which means planning months ahead, and it has to be stored in a way that keeps it dry, but doesn't take up the limited space in your shoebox of a home. Summer isn't much better. Now you're sweating through clothes that you can't wash regularly, and the smell situation becomes truly apocalyptic. Everyone stinks, but you can't acknowledge it because complaining about earthly discomforts might be seen as ingratitude to God. The heat makes food spoil faster, which means you're constantly walking the line between hunger and food poisoning. Flies and mosquitoes are everywhere, spreading disease and making every moment outdoors a battle against nature's tiniest terrorists. The bathroom situation deserves its own horror story. There are no bathrooms. There are outhouses, if you're lucky, which are basically wooden boxes over pits of human waste. In winter, the seat is cold enough to cause frostbite on your ass. In summer, the smell is strong enough to knock you unconscious. The toilet paper is whatever leaves or corn husks you can find, assuming you can find anything at all. Privacy is a luxury you can't afford because the outhouse is usually visible from the house, and neighbours love to keep track of how long you spend in there. And if you're really unlucky, you might be using a chamber pot, which means you're literally living with a container of human waste in your bedroom. The smell never goes away. Never. You just learn to mouth breathe and pray for death. Personal hygiene is basically non-existent. You might get a full bath a few times a year if you're lucky. The rest of the time, you're doing spot cleaning with cold water and harsh soaps that strip your skin raw. Your teeth are probably falling out because dental care consists of pulling out anything that hurts. Your hair is probably full of lice, but everyone's hair is full of lice, so it's not like you stand out. Deodorant won't be invented for another couple hundred years, so everyone smells like a combination of sweat, unwashed clothes, and whatever they've been working with. If you work with animals, you smell like animals. If you work with food, you smell like rotten food. If you work with anything at all, you smell like failure and desperation. But here's where the witch trial situation really cranks up the crazy. You're not just dealing with normal colonial hardship, you're dealing with a community that's gone completely paranoid and is looking for someone to blame for all their problems. Crop failed, witches. Kid got sick, witches. Butter won't churn, obviously witches. Your neighbour looked at you sideways? Better accuse them of witchcraft before they accuse you. The accusation process is beautifully insane. Anyone can accuse anyone of anything, and the burden of proof is basically, I had a bad feeling about them. The evidence that gets people convicted includes things like having a birthmark, clearly a devil's mark. Being able to recite prayers backwards, witch skill. Not being able to recite prayers, also witch behaviour. Being too friendly, suspicious. Being unfriendly, also suspicious. Having a pet that acts weird, familiar spirit. Not having pets, avoiding animal witnesses. Being poor, desperate enough for devil's bargain. Being wealthy, obviously made a deal with Satan. Being sick a lot, weak to evil influences. Being healthy, supernatural protection. You literally cannot win. The system is designed to find everyone guilty of something. It's like playing a rigged carnival game where the prizes are death and the entrance fee is your sanity. The court proceedings are a joke that would be funny if people weren't actually dying. The judges are just local guys who've decided they're qualified to determine supernatural guilt. There are no lawyers, no real evidence requirements, and no appeals process. If the teenage girls having fits say you're a witch, then you're probably a witch. Case closed. The evidence presented in court includes things like spectral evidence, which means if someone claims your ghost visited them in a dream and did witch stuff, that counts as proof. Dream testimony is literally admissible in court. If I told you that in modern times you'd think I was making it up, but in Salem, your literal dreams can be used to justify someone else's execution. The accused are subjected to various tests to determine their guilt. The swimming test involves tying you up and throwing you in water. If you float, you're a witch, because water rejects evil. If you sink and drown, congratulations, you were innocent. The prayer test involves making you recite prayers while people look for any stumbles or mistakes. The touch test involves seeing if you can stop someone's fits by touching them, which is apparently both proof of witchcraft and the cure for it. My personal favourite is the examination for devil's marks. Officials will strip you naked and examine every inch of your body for any unusual marks, moles, scars or blemishes that could be where the devil suckled from you. Because apparently Satan is a vampire who leaves hickeys. Having literally any skin imperfection can be evidence of your guilt. Acne, devil's marks, scars from normal life, devil's marks, birthmarks, definitely devil's marks. The prison situation is exactly what you'd expect from a system that's already shown complete disregard for human rights. The Salem jail is basically a medieval dungeon where accused witches are chained to walls in dark, freezing cells. You have to pay for your own food and firewood, so if your family can't afford to keep you alive, you just starve. The cells are overcrowded, unsanitary, and perfect breeding grounds for disease. Many accused witches die in jail before they can even be tried, which is probably a mercy considering the alternative. But let's say you survive the jail experience and make it to trial. The courtroom is packed with people eager to watch the supernatural justice show. It's the only entertainment in town, so everyone shows up to see who gets condemned to death today. The atmosphere is part witch trial, part public execution, part community theatre. People are literally bringing snacks to watch their neighbours get sentenced to hang. The trials themselves are conducted by men who have no legal training and are basically making up procedure as they go along. The star witnesses are teenage girls who throw fits and scream about invisible attacks whenever they see the accused. These girls have figured out that they're the centre of attention for the first time in their lives, and they're milking it for all it's worth. They're basically the world's first reality TV stars, except their show gets people killed. The spectral evidence thing cannot be overstated for its complete insanity. The court is literally accepting testimony like, "I saw the defendant's ghost in my dream, and dream defendant told me they were a witch." This is being treated as factual evidence in a life or death legal proceeding. It's like convicting someone of murder because someone else had a bad dream about them. But even if you somehow manage to prove your innocence, which is nearly impossible given the rigged system, your life is still ruined. Being accused of witchcraft is social suicide. Your neighbours will never trust you again. Your business will suffer because no one wants to deal with a suspected witch. Your family will be tainted by association. Kids will throw rocks at your house. You'll be the local boogeyman for the rest of your life. And let's talk about the execution process, because it's exactly as horrible as you'd expect. If you're found guilty, you get hanged on Gallows Hill in front of the entire community. It's not a quick, merciful death. Colonial hanging is designed to strangle you slowly rather than break your neck cleanly. You'll dangle there, gasping for air and slowly suffocating while your neighbours watch and probably place bets on how long you'll last. The families of the executed aren't allowed to claim the bodies immediately. The corpses are thrown into shallow graves without proper burial rites because witches don't deserve Christian burials. Your family has to live with the knowledge that your body is rotting in unhallowed ground, while your soul is presumably burning in hell for all eternity. But wait, there's more. Even death doesn't end the punishment. Your property gets confiscated by the court to pay for your imprisonment and trial costs. Your family is left destitute and socially ostracized. Your children grow up with the stigma of being witch spawn. Your name becomes a cautionary tale whispered around dinner tables for generations. The really fun part is that you never know when it's going to be your turn. The accusations spread like wildfire through the community. One day you're a normal person trying to survive colonial life, and the next day someone's teenage daughter is screaming that your spectre tried to make her sign the devil's book. There's no pattern, no logic, no way to protect yourself except maybe by accusing someone else first. The paranoia affects every aspect of daily life. You can't have normal conversations anymore, because anything you say might be twisted into evidence of witchcraft. Complaining about the weather might be seen as trying to control it supernaturally. Mentioning that someone looks sick might be interpreted as casting a spell on them. Expressing any knowledge about herbs or healing might mark you as practicing folk magic. Social gatherings become minefields of potential accusations. Church services are tense affairs where everyone's watching everyone else for signs of supernatural influence. Market days are exercises in careful diplomacy, where the wrong word or gesture could start rumours that end in execution. Even family dinners are dangerous because family members might turn on each other to save themselves. The economic impact is devastating. Trade slows down because no one wants to do business with potential witches. Farms suffer because suspected witches can't get help with harvests. The legal system is so clogged with witch trials that normal civil disputes can't get resolved. The entire community is paralysed by fear and suspicion. Women get the worst of it, obviously. In a society that already treats women as second-class citizens, being female makes you automatically more suspicious. Women who are too independent get accused. Women who are too submissive get accused. Women who know too much about traditional healing get accused. Women who don't fit the perfect Puritan housewife mould get accused. Basically, being a woman in Salem during the witch trials is like playing Russian roulette, where most of the chambers are loaded. Older women, especially widows, are prime targets. They often know traditional remedies and folk wisdom that can be construed as witchcraft. They don't have husbands to protect them socially or economically. They might own property that others want to acquire. They're often cantankerous because life has beaten them down, which makes them easy to dislike and accuse. But men aren't safe either. Male witches are definitely a thing in Salem's paranoid worldview. Men who are too successful might have made deals with the devil. Men who are too unsuccessful might be cursed. Men who defend accused women might be under their supernatural influence. Men who don't defend accused women might be trying to hide their own guilt. The clergy is supposed to provide moral guidance, but they're mostly just fanning the flames of hysteria. The local ministers are giving sermons about the devil's presence in Salem and encouraging people to root out evil wherever they find it. They're treating the witch trials as a holy war between good and evil, which gives divine sanction to the madness. Cotton Mather, one of the most influential ministers of the time, is writing books about the Salem witch trials that treat them as factual accounts of supernatural warfare. He's basically the period's equivalent of a conspiracy theorist with a huge platform, spreading paranoid fantasies and legitimizing the persecution. His writings will influence witch trial procedures for years to come, spreading the Salem model of supernatural justice to other communities. The psychological toll on the entire community is immense. Everyone is walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do anything that might trigger an accusation. Children are informing on their parents. Spouses are testifying against each other. Neighbours who've lived peacefully for years are suddenly mortal enemies. The social fabric of the community is completely torn apart. Sleep becomes impossible for many people. How do you rest when you know that someone might accuse you of sending your spirit out to torment people in their dreams? How do you dream when your dreams might be used as evidence against someone else? How do you wake up refreshed when you spend every night wondering if tomorrow will be the day someone points a finger at you? The stress manifests in physical symptoms that, ironically, can be interpreted as evidence of witchcraft. If you're losing weight from anxiety, people might think you're wasting away from supernatural causes. If you're gaining weight from stress eating, people might think you're being supernaturally sustained. If you're having trouble sleeping, people might think your spirit is out causing mischief. If you're sleeping too much, people might think you're under a spell. Medical knowledge is so limited that any unusual symptom can be attributed to supernatural causes. Having seizures? Probably possessed. Talking to yourself? Clearly communing with spirits. Mood swings? Obviously under supernatural influence. Mental illness? Definitely witchcraft related. The line between medicine and magic is basically non-existent, which means any health problem can become evidence of supernatural activity. The trials create their own momentum. Once accusations start flying, they have to keep finding more witches to justify the original accusations. If they admit they were wrong about the first cases, it undermines the whole system. So they keep digging deeper, finding more conspirators, uncovering larger plots. What starts as accusations against a few unpopular women escalates into claims of vast supernatural conspiracies involving dozens of people. The alleged witches' confessions become more elaborate and fantastical as the trials progress. Under pressure, and probably torture, accused witches start describing detailed meetings with the devil, flying to witch gatherings, and participating in supernatural plots against the community. These confessions are taken as factual accounts, rather than the desperate attempts to say whatever might save their lives that they obviously are. The devil himself becomes a character in the trials, with witnesses describing his appearance, his voice, his promises, and his demands. Satan is apparently very active in Salem, personally recruiting witches and organizing supernatural attacks on the Puritan community. He's described as everything from a tall black man to a small dark creature to various animal forms. Consistency isn't required when you're dealing with supernatural testimony. The witch meetings, or Sabbaths, become elaborate fantasies involving dozens of participants, supernatural feasts, and anti-Christian rituals. According to the testimonies, Salem's witches are holding regular conventions where they plan their attacks on the community, sign the devil's book, and participate in various unholy activities. These gatherings are described in vivid detail that would make excellent fiction if they weren't being used to justify real executions. The supernatural attacks themselves are creative works of imagination. Witches are supposedly sending their spirits to pinch, bite, choke, and torment their victims. They're causing mysterious illnesses, spoiling food, killing livestock, and generally wreaking havoc through supernatural means. The victims describe elaborate spiritual assaults that read like horror novels, but are treated as factual accounts in court. Meanwhile, you're still trying to survive normal colonial life while this supernatural circus is going on around you. You still need to grow food, raise animals, make tools, preserve meat, spin cloth, and do all the other backbreaking work required to stay alive. But now you have to do it while constantly looking over your shoulder for accusers and being careful not to do anything that might be construed as witchcraft. The irony is that the witch trials are making everyone's normal life even harder. People are afraid to help their neighbours because kindness might be seen as suspicious. Traditional healing practices are abandoned because they might be construed as witchcraft. Community cooperation breaks down because no one trusts anyone else. The very social bonds that make colonial life survivable are being destroyed by paranoia. Economic activity slows to a crawl because business relationships require trust, and trust is extinct in Salem. Who wants to enter into contracts with potential witches? Who wants to lend money to people who might be supernatural criminals? Who wants to hire workers who might use their jobs to practice witchcraft? The witch trials are creating economic paralysis on top of social chaos. The legal system is completely overwhelmed by witch cases, which means normal legal business gets ignored. Property disputes go unresolved. Contract violations go unpunished. Civil complaints get buried under the avalanche of supernatural accusations. If you have a legitimate legal problem that doesn't involve witchcraft, good luck getting anyone to pay attention to it. The seasonal cycles that normally govern colonial life get disrupted by the trial schedule. Harvest time conflicts with trial dates. Planting season gets interrupted by imprisonment. Winter preparations get delayed by court appearances. The natural rhythms of agricultural life are being subordinated to the artificial rhythms of supernatural justice. Food production suffers because suspected witches can't participate in community work projects. If your neighbour is accused of witchcraft, you can't help them with their harvest even if you want to, because association with witches is dangerous. If you're accused yourself, you can't get help with your own farming, because everyone's afraid to be seen helping a potential witch. The knowledge economy collapses as people become afraid to share traditional wisdom. Herbalists stop teaching their craft because plant knowledge might be seen as witchcraft. Midwives stop taking apprentices because birthing knowledge might be construed as supernatural. Craftsmen stop passing on their skills because any specialised knowledge might be viewed with suspicion. Children's education suffers because teachers are afraid to teach anything that might be misconstrued. Reading and writing are already rare skills, but now they're potentially dangerous because literacy might be associated with reading supernatural texts. Mathematical knowledge becomes suspect because numbers might be used for casting spells. Even basic education becomes risky in an environment where knowledge itself is suspicious. The generational transfer of skills that's essential for colonial survival gets interrupted by the witch trials. Older people who should be teaching younger people are either accused of witchcraft, dead, or afraid to share their knowledge. Younger people who should be learning essential skills are either serving as witnesses in trials, dead, or too traumatized to focus on learning. Family structures collapse under the strain of mutual accusation. Children testify against parents. Siblings turn on each other. Spouses betray their partners to save themselves. The basic social unit of colonial society, the family, becomes a battlefield where supernatural accusations replace family loyalty. Marriage becomes a dangerous proposition because your spouse's behaviour reflects on you. If your wife is accused of witchcraft, you might be seen as either her victim or her accomplice. If your husband is accused, you might be viewed as either under his supernatural influence or complicit in his activities. Marital partnerships that should provide mutual support become sources of mutual suspicion. Child rearing becomes impossible under these conditions. How do you teach children right from wrong when the definition of wrong includes supernatural crimes that no one really understands? How do you discipline children when any unusual behaviour might be attributed to supernatural influence? How do you protect children when they might be called as witnesses against you? The reproductive cycle gets disrupted by the stress and fear of the witch trials. Women are probably having more miscarriages due to anxiety. Infant mortality rates, already high, probably increase due to parental stress and social disruption. Fertility rates might drop because people are afraid to bring children into such a dangerous world. But let's get back to the actual trial process, because it's somehow even worse than I've described. The preliminary examinations are public spectacles, where accused witches are subjected to humiliating tests in front of crowds of spectators. You're stripped naked and examined for devil's marks while your neighbours watch and comment. You're forced to recite prayers while people look for any stumbles that might indicate supernatural interference. The interrogation techniques would make modern police investigators cringe. Accused witches are subjected to sleep deprivation, constant questioning, and psychological pressure designed to break them down. They're told that confession is their only hope of salvation, both legal and spiritual. They're promised mercy if they confess and threatened with damnation if they don't. The physical conditions of interrogation are deliberately harsh. Suspects are kept in cold, dark cells without adequate food or water. They're chained in uncomfortable positions for hours at a time. They're denied basic human comforts like clean clothes or sanitary facilities. The goal is to break their will and force confessions through physical and psychological torture. The confessions themselves become elaborate performances designed to satisfy the investigators' expectations. Accused witches learn what the court wants to hear and provide increasingly detailed accounts of their supernatural activities. They name other conspirators to deflect attention from themselves. They describe fantastic meetings and rituals that exist only in their desperate imaginations. The court records of these confessions read like collaborative fiction projects, where each new confession builds on previous ones. Witches describe attending the same supernatural meetings, participating in the same rituals, and serving the same supernatural master. The consistency comes not from shared experiences, but from shared desperation to tell the court what it wants to hear. The execution process is designed to maximize both punishment and public spectacle. The condemned are transported to Gallows Hill in carts, paraded through town so everyone can see them one last time. They're given opportunities to confess publicly and implicate others, which some do in hopes of last-minute reprieve. They're allowed to make final statements, which are carefully monitored for any signs of supernatural influence. The hanging itself is conducted with all the ceremony of a religious ritual. Prayers are said, sermons are delivered, and the community is reminded of the wages of sin. The condemned are positioned on the gallows while crowds gather to witness God's justice being carried out. The execution is presented not as punishment, but as necessary spiritual cleansing of the community. The The bodies are handled according to their perceived spiritual status. Confessed witches who showed repentance might receive somewhat proper burial. Unrepentant witches are dumped in unmarked graves or left hanging as warnings to others. The families are often denied the right to claim the bodies or hold proper funeral services. The property confiscation process adds financial ruin to social destruction. Everything owned by convicted witches becomes property of the court, supposedly to pay for their imprisonment and trial costs. Families are left destitute overnight. Children of executed witches become orphans and outcasts simultaneously. Widows and widowers of the executed lose everything and have no social support system. The social rehabilitation of accusers is immediate and complete. The teenage girls who started the whole mess are treated as heroes who helped cleanse the community of evil. They receive attention, sympathy, and social status that they never had before. They're probably having the best year of their lives while people die based on their accusations. The aftermath of each execution creates new waves of paranoia rather than providing closure. If the executed witch was supposedly part of a larger conspiracy, then other conspirators must still be active. If the witch was working alone, then other individual witches must be operating independently. Either way, the threat isn't eliminated by killing people, it's just redistributed to new suspects. The psychological aftermath for survivors is devastating. People who escaped accusation live with survivors' guilt and ongoing terror. People who made accusations live with the knowledge that they might have killed innocent people. People who remained silent live with the guilt of not speaking up. Everyone is traumatized, but trauma isn't recognized as a legitimate medical condition yet. The economic aftermath is equally severe. Families who lost breadwinners to execution face starvation. Properties that were confiscated sit empty and unproductive. Business relationships that were destroyed by suspicion don't automatically rebuild when the trials end. The community's economic foundation is fundamentally damaged. The religious aftermath is complex and contradictory. Some people lose faith in a God who would allow such injustice. Others become more religious, seeing the trials as proof of Satan's power and the need for constant vigilance. Still others develop guilt complexes about their role in the events. The Puritan religious framework that was supposed to provide moral guidance has instead enabled mass murder. The legal aftermath is minimal because there's no real legal system capable of addressing what happened. There are no civil rights violations because civil rights don't exist yet. There's no wrongful death litigation because the legal system that ordered the executions is the same system that would have to acknowledge its errors. Justice for the victims is impossible within the existing framework. The social aftermath lingers for generations. Families of the executed carry the stigma forever. Children grow up knowing their parents or grandparents were executed as witches. The social divisions created by the trials become permanent features of the community. Trust, once destroyed, doesn't automatically return when the immediate crisis ends. But here's the really fun part. While all this supernatural drama is unfolding, you still have to deal with all the normal colonial hardships that were already making your life miserable. The weather doesn't care that your community is having a witch trial crisis. Winter is still cold, summer is still hot, and spring flooding still destroys your crops. Disease doesn't take breaks for legal proceedings. Accidents don't pause for supernatural investigations. Your daily survival needs don't disappear because the community is obsessed with witchcraft. You still need to eat, and food still requires the same amount of work to produce. You still need shelter, and houses still require constant maintenance and repair. You still need clothes, and textile production still involves the same laborious processes of growing, processing, spinning, and weaving. The normal colonial dangers are still present and possibly worse. Wild animals are still threats when you venture into forest for hunting or wood gathering. Other human settlements might still pose military threats. Disease outbreaks still sweep through communities with devastating results. Natural disasters still destroy homes and crops without warning. But now you have to deal with all these normal problems while also navigating the supernatural panic. You can't focus on practical survival when you're constantly worried about accusations. You can't make rational decisions about farming or business when the social environment is completely irrational. You can't plan for the future when you don't know if you'll be alive next month. The multi-layered stress of colonial life plus witch trial paranoia creates a perfect storm of human misery. You're dealing with physical hardship, economic uncertainty, social isolation, legal jeopardy, religious guilt, and psychological trauma all at the same time. It's like being trapped in multiple horror movies simultaneously, and the worst part, there's no escape. You can't move to another town because the witch trial mentality is spreading to other communities. You can't opt out of the legal system because there is no other legal system. You can't seek professional help for trauma because professional help doesn't exist. You can't even drink your problems away because alcohol is expensive, and being drunk might be seen as evidence of supernatural influence. Your coping mechanisms are limited to prayer, which might not be very comforting when your supposedly Christian community is murdering people based on dreams, and work, which is difficult when you're afraid your co-workers might accuse you of witchcraft. Social support is impossible because social bonds have been destroyed by suspicion. Family support is unreliable because family members might turn on each other. The normal human responses to stress and trauma, seeking help, talking through problems, relying on community support, finding meaning in suffering, are all either unavailable or potentially dangerous. Seeking help might make you look suspicious. Talking through problems might provide evidence for accusations. Community support doesn't exist because the community is turned into a war zone. Finding meaning in suffering might be interpreted as acceptance of your supposedly supernatural crimes. So you're stuck in a situation where you have to somehow maintain your sanity and will to live while dealing with constant mortal danger from your own neighbours, crushing physical hardship from the colonial lifestyle, and complete absence of the social and psychological support systems that make human life bearable. The sleep deprivation alone would be enough to break most people. How do you get restful sleep when every night might be your last? How do you dream peacefully when your dreams might be used as evidence against someone else? How do you wake up with energy for another day when each day might bring new accusations or executions? The nutrition situation gets worse under stress, and colonial nutrition was already marginal at best. Anxiety kills appetite, but you can't afford to lose weight when you're already surviving on subsistence-level calories. Stress increases nutritional needs, but stress also makes it harder to digest and absorb nutrients from the poor quality food that's available. The immune system, already compromised by poor nutrition and harsh living conditions, gets further weakened by chronic stress. You're more susceptible to every disease that comes through town, and getting sick makes you more vulnerable to accusations because illness might be attributed to supernatural causes. It's a vicious cycle where the stress of avoiding witch accusations makes you more likely to develop symptoms that could lead to witch accusations. Your cognitive function deteriorates under the constant pressure. It's hard to think clearly when you're operating in survival mode 24 hours a day. Decision-making becomes impaired when every choice might have supernatural implications. Memory gets unreliable when you're sleep-deprived and traumatized, which is particularly dangerous when people are looking for inconsistencies in your statements as evidence of guilt. The chronic hypervigilance required to survive in this environment is exhausting. You have to constantly monitor your own behavior, other people's reactions, community gossip, and legal developments. You're always scanning for threats, always ready to defend yourself, always preparing for the worst. It's like being a soldier in a war zone, except the enemy could be anyone, and the battlefield is everywhere. But let's talk about some of the specific people caught up in this nightmare, because their individual stories really illustrate just how random and brutal the whole system was. Take Bridget Bishop, the first person executed in the Salem witch trials. Her crime? Running a tavern where people actually had fun. She served alcohol, allowed games, and generally provided the kind of entertainment that made Puritan ministers clutch their pearls. Bishop had the audacity to be a businesswoman in a society that thought women should be silent and submissive. She wore bright colours, which was apparently evidence of vanity and possibly supernatural influence. She had been married multiple times, which made her sexually suspect. She owned property, which made her economically threatening. She was basically everything the Puritan community feared about independent women, so when the witch trial started, she was an obvious target. The evidence against Bishop included testimony that she had appeared in people's dreams to torment them. Yes, dream testimony was literally accepted as evidence in a capital case. People also testified that she had bewitched their livestock, caused their children to have fits, and generally used supernatural powers to make their lives difficult. The fact that these same problems occurred in communities without accused witches was apparently irrelevant. Bishop maintained her innocence throughout the trial, which was actually seen as evidence of her guilt. If she were truly innocent, the reasoning went, she would confess her sins and throw herself on the mercy of the court. Her refusal to confess was interpreted as stubborn pride, and continued allegiance to Satan, you literally could not win in this system. When Bishop was executed on June 10th, 1692, she became the first victim of what would become a killing spree. Her death didn't satisfy the community's bloodlust, it just whetted their appetite for more supernatural justice. The successful prosecution of Bishop proved that the system worked, which encouraged more accusations and more trials. Then there's Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother who was basically the colonial equivalent of everyone's favourite Sunday school teacher. Nurse was known for her piety, her charity work and her devotion to her family. She was exactly the kind of person you'd expect to be protected by her reputation and social standing. You'd be wrong. Nurse's problems started when she got into a property dispute with a neighbour family. Property disputes in colonial times were serious business because land was literally survival, and neighbours who felt cheated might hold grudges for generations. When the witch accusations started flying, Nurse's enemies saw an opportunity to settle old scores through supernatural justice. The evidence against Nurse was particularly ridiculous, even by Salem standards. The main accusers claimed that Nurse's spectre had visited them to torment them and recruit them for Satan's army. They described elaborate supernatural attacks that supposedly left physical marks but somehow never left actual evidence. They claimed that Nurse could stop their fits by touching them, which was simultaneously proof that she had caused the fits and that she had the power to cure them. What makes Nurse's case particularly tragic is that she was initially found not guilty by the jury. The community response to the acquittal was so hostile that the judges sent the jury back to reconsider their verdict. Under pressure from both the court and the mob, the jury changed their verdict to guilty. Nurse was executed on July 19th, 1692, along with 4 other women who had the misfortune of being accused during the peak of the hysteria. Nurse's execution was particularly shocking because she represented everything the Puritan community claimed to value. She was elderly, devout, charitable, and respected. If someone like Rebecca Nurse could be executed as a witch, then literally anyone could be next. Her death probably convinced many people that the system had gone completely insane, but by then it was too late to stop the momentum. The case of John Proctor illustrates how men weren't safe from accusations either. Proctor was a successful farmer and tavern keeper who made the fatal mistake of criticising the witch trials publicly. He called the proceedings a fraud and suggested that the accusers were lying for attention. In Salem's paranoid environment, criticism of the trials was interpreted as evidence of supernatural allegiance. Proctor's wife Elizabeth was accused first, probably as a way to get at him indirectly. When John defended his wife and criticised her accusers, he became a target himself. The logic was simple. Only someone under supernatural influence would defend a witch, and only a witch would criticise the godly work of rooting out evil. John's defence of his wife became evidence of his own guilt. The evidence against John Proctor included the usual dream testimonies and spectral sightings, but it also included something new, testimony from his own servants. Under pressure and possibly torture, Proctor's servants testified that he had forced them to sign the Devil's Book and participate in supernatural activities. The people who worked in his household, who knew him better than anyone, turned against him to save themselves. Proctor was executed on August 19, 1692, along with 4 other men and women. His final statement from the gallows criticised the proceedings and maintained his innocence, but by then public opinion was starting to turn against the trials. His death, along with the others executed that day, marked the beginning of the end of the Salem witch trials, but it came too late to save him. The case of Martha Corey shows how even being a church member in good standing couldn't protect you from accusations. Corey was a respectable church member who made the mistake of expressing skepticism about the early accusations. She suggested that the afflicted girls might be mistaken or lying, which immediately made her a target for their supernatural wrath. Corey's skepticism was interpreted as evidence that she was trying to protect other witches by discrediting their victims. Her knowledge of the accusation's details was seen as evidence that she had supernatural information about the proceedings. Her calm demeanour during questioning was interpreted as either supernatural composure or callous indifference to her victim's suffering. The accusers claimed that Corey's spectre had appeared to them with a book for them to sign, presumably the devil's roster of supernatural servants. They described her supernatural form in vivid detail, including her clothing and mannerisms. The fact that these descriptions might have been based on their normal observations of Corey was apparently irrelevant to the court. Corey was executed on September 22, 1692, in the final group of executions before the trials were suspended. Her death, along with 7 others that day, finally shocked the community into recognizing that the proceedings had gone too far. But for Martha Corey, the recognition came too late. The most horrific case might be that of Giles Corey, Martha's husband, who was subjected to pressing, a form of torture designed to force confessions. When Giles refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, the court decided to torture him until he cooperated. He was stripped naked, had a board placed on his chest, and was slowly crushed under increasing weights. The pressing was supposed to continue until Corey either entered a plea or died. The theory was that no one could endure such agony without eventually cooperating with the court. Corey proved them wrong by enduring 2 days of torture without giving in. His last recorded words were allegedly, "more weight," which may be the most badass final statement in American history. Corey's pressing was technically legal under English law, but it was still torture designed to extract cooperation through agony. The fact that an 80-year-old man was tortured to death for refusing to participate in legal proceedings that he considered fraudulent shows just how far Salem's justice system had departed from any recognizable moral framework. The children involved in the trials deserve special mention because their role was so central to the entire catastrophe. The initial accusers were girls between the ages of 9 and 20, and their fits and visions drove the entire process. These weren't innocent children caught up in adult madness. They were active participants who seemed to understand exactly what they were doing. The girls learned quickly that their accusations had power. They could point at anyone and watch that person be arrested, tried, and potentially killed. They had adults hanging on their every word, taking their visions as gospel truth, and treating them as heroes for exposing supernatural evil. For children who had probably never been the center of attention before, this must have been intoxicating. The girls' performances became increasingly elaborate as the trials progressed. They would fall into fits when accused witches looked at them, scream about invisible attacks, and describe detailed supernatural encounters. They coordinated their testimonies to support each other's claims, and probably coached each other on what to say to maximize their impact. The most disturbing aspect of the children's involvement is how they seemed to enjoy the power they wielded. They weren't just reporting supernatural experiences, they were actively seeking out new targets and expanding their accusations to include more and more people. They turned the witch trials into their personal entertainment, with real human lives as the stakes. The adults who should have protected the community from children's fantasies instead enabled and encouraged them. Parents, ministers, and judges all treated the girls' accusations as reliable testimony worthy of legal action. No one seemed to consider that children might lie, exaggerate, or seek attention through dramatic behavior. The girls' accusations followed patterns that suggest coordination and planning rather than spontaneous supernatural experiences. They often accused people who were already unpopular or vulnerable. They rarely accused anyone with enough social power to retaliate effectively. They seemed to understand the community's social dynamics and target their accusations accordingly. When the trials finally ended, most of the accusing girls simply faded back into normal life, without facing any consequences for their role in the deaths of 20 people. Some later married and had families, carrying the secret of their participation in mass murder into their adult lives. Only one, Ann Putnam Jr., ever publicly apologized for her role, and that was years later when the immediate consequences were long past. The role of the ministers in enabling and encouraging the trials cannot be overstated. These were supposedly learned men who should have provided moral and intellectual leadership to help the community navigate the crisis. Instead, they became cheerleaders for supernatural justice and provided religious justification for legal murder. Cotton Mather, in particular, used his influence to support and publicize the trials. He wrote extensively about the supernatural war being waged in Salem and presented the trials as necessary battles against Satan himself. His writings gave intellectual and religious credibility to proceedings that should have been recognized as obvious madness. The ministers treated the witch trials as proof of their own theological theories about Satan's presence in the world. They saw the accusations and confessions as validation of their warnings about supernatural evil. They used the trials as sermon material and teaching opportunities rather than questioning whether innocent people might be dying based on unreliable testimony. The religious framework that was supposed to provide moral guidance instead created moral blindness. The belief that Satan was actively recruiting human agents made it easy to believe that neighbours might be supernatural enemies. The emphasis on confession and repentance made it seem merciful to torture people until they admitted their guilt. The focus on spiritual warfare made it seem necessary to kill people to protect the community's soul. But let's get back to what your daily life would actually be like during this period, because the individual stories of victims are horrific, but the everyday experience of living through this crisis is what would really drive you insane. You wake up every morning not knowing if today is the day someone points a finger at you. You go through your daily routine while constantly monitoring your own behaviour for anything that might be construed as suspicious. Your morning prayers take on new urgency, because being seen as insufficiently pious is dangerous. But praying too fervently might also be suspect, because it could indicate desperation to appear innocent. You have to find the exact right level of religious observance that demonstrates proper devotion without suggesting guilt or overcompensation. Your work becomes a minefield of potential accusations. If you're too successful, people might think you've made supernatural bargains. If you're struggling, people might think you're being punished for hidden sins. If your crops grow well, people might think you've used witchcraft to enhance them. If your crops fail, people might think you're being cursed by other witches or cursing yourself through guilt. Every interaction with neighbours becomes a diplomatic challenge. You can't be too friendly because that might seem suspicious or manipulative. You can't be unfriendly because that might seem antisocial or guilt-ridden. You can't share knowledge because that might seem like supernatural wisdom. You can't claim ignorance because that might seem like you're hiding something. Your conversations are constantly monitored and analysed for hidden meanings. Complaining about the weather might be interpreted as trying to control it magically. Commenting on someone's health might be seen as casting spells on them. Expressing opinions about anything might be twisted into evidence of supernatural knowledge or influence. The social gatherings that normally provide relief from colonial hardship become additional sources of stress. Church services are tense affairs where everyone watches everyone else for signs of supernatural activity. Market days are exercises in careful neutrality where any wrong word could start fatal rumours. Even family meals become dangerous because family members might feel pressured to report suspicious behaviour. Your children become both potential victims and potential threats. They might be targeted by accusations, but they might also be recruited as witnesses against you or other family members. Teaching them anything becomes risky because knowledge itself is suspect. Disciplining them becomes dangerous because any unusual behaviour might be attributed to supernatural influence. Your marriage, if you have one, becomes a source of mutual suspicion rather than mutual support. Your spouse's behaviour reflects on you, and your behaviour reflects on them. You're both constantly watching each other for anything that might trigger accusations. Marital arguments become dangerous because anger might be seen as evidence of supernatural influence. The normal cycles of life, birth, marriage, death, all become potential sources of supernatural suspicion. Pregnancy might be seen as evidence of supernatural fertility or demonic influence. Childbirth complications might be attributed to witchcraft. Deaths in the family might be blamed on supernatural attacks. Even natural biological processes become dangerous in an environment where everything is seen through a supernatural lens. Your health becomes a constant source of anxiety because any unusual symptom might be interpreted as evidence of supernatural activity. Headaches might be seen as spiritual attacks. Fatigue might be attributed to nighttime spiritual activities. Changes in appetite might be connected to supernatural influences. Even normal aging processes might be seen as evidence of supernatural bargains or curses. The economic aspects of daily life become impossibly complicated when supernatural considerations are added to normal survival concerns. You can't make business decisions based purely on practical considerations anymore, because supernatural implications have to be considered. Trading with accused witches becomes dangerous. Buying property from suspicious families becomes risky. Even normal commercial relationships become potential sources of supernatural suspicion. Your knowledge and skills, which should be assets for survival, become potential liabilities. Knowing too much about healing might mark you as practicing witchcraft. Being too good at any craft might suggest supernatural enhancement. Having unusual insights or intuitions might be seen as supernatural communication. Intelligence itself becomes dangerous when ignorance is safer. The seasonal rhythms that normally govern colonial life get disrupted by the unpredictable timing of accusations and trials. You can't plan agricultural activities around court schedules that change without notice. You can't prepare for winter when you might not survive the summer. You can't make long-term plans when your immediate survival is constantly in question. The normal human need for privacy becomes impossible to satisfy when community surveillance is constant. You can't have private thoughts because your expressions and behavior are constantly monitored for signs of guilt. You can't have private conversations because anything you say might be reported and twisted. You can't have private moments because someone is always watching for suspicious activity. Your emotional life becomes completely constrained by the need to appear normal and innocent at all times. You can't express anger because that might be seen as supernatural rage. You can't show fear because that might be interpreted as guilt. You can't display unusual happiness because that might suggest supernatural influence. You have to maintain perfect emotional equilibrium while dealing with constant terror and stress. The normal process of grief and mourning becomes dangerous when deaths might be attributed to supernatural causes. If someone dies in your family, you have to mourn in exactly the right way. Not too much grief, which might suggest guilt, and not too little grief, which might suggest callousness or supernatural influence. Even your emotional responses to loss become potential evidence against you. The community bonds that make colonial life survivable are systematically destroyed by mutual suspicion and fear. Neighbours who should help each other in times of crisis instead watch each other for signs of supernatural activity. Friends become potential accusers. Even family members become sources of danger rather than support. The normal human desire for meaning and purpose gets corrupted when survival requires avoiding any behaviour that might be seen as significant or purposeful. You can't pursue interests or passions because enthusiasm might be suspicious. You can't try to make a difference in your community because standing out is dangerous. You have to live the most bland, unremarkable life possible, while still appearing sufficiently engaged to avoid suspicion of withdrawal or guilt. The physical environment becomes psychologically oppressive when every location might be associated with supernatural activity. Woods become places where witches might gather. Fields become places where supernatural meetings might occur. Even your own home becomes a potential site of supernatural accusations. There's literally nowhere to go to escape the atmosphere of suspicion and fear. The temporal experience of life changes when you're living in constant crisis mode. Time seems to slow down when you're hyper-alert to potential threats. Days feel endless when you're constantly on guard. Nights become exercises in terror when darkness brings dreams that might be used as evidence against you or others. The normal rhythm of daily life gets replaced by the irregular rhythm of accusations, trials, and executions. Your relationship with your own body becomes fraught when physical symptoms might be interpreted as supernatural signs. You become hyper-aware of every ache, pain, or unusual sensation because they might be attributed to witchcraft. You can't trust your own physical experiences because they might be used as evidence against you or others. Even normal bodily functions become sources of anxiety. The cognitive load of constantly monitoring yourself and others for supernatural signs is exhausting. You have to remember what you've said to whom, what you've done where, and what reactions you've observed. You have to keep track of community gossip, legal developments, and social dynamics. You have to maintain perfect consistency in your statements and behaviour while dealing with sleep deprivation and stress. The moral framework that should guide your decisions becomes useless when normal ethical principles conflict with survival necessities. Should you help a neighbour who's been accused of witchcraft? Should you report suspicious behaviour that might be innocent? Should you confess to crimes you didn't commit to save your life? The normal moral compass becomes unreliable when the social context is completely insane. Your relationship with truth becomes complicated when lies might be safer than honesty. Telling the truth about your thoughts, feelings, or experiences might provide ammunition for accusations. Admitting to normal human failings might be interpreted as evidence of supernatural guilt. Even being honest about your confusion or fear might be seen as suspicious behaviour. The normal human need for authentic relationships becomes impossible to satisfy when everyone is performing innocence for survival. You can't be genuine with anyone because genuineness might reveal something that could be used against you. You can't trust anyone because they might use your confidence against you. Even your closest relationships become theatrical performances rather than authentic connections. This is what it really meant to live through the Salem witch trials. Not just the dramatic courtroom scenes and execution spectacles, but the daily grind of existing in a community that had gone completely paranoid and turned survival into a constant performance of innocence. It was like being trapped in the world's deadliest improvisational theatre, where the audience could kill you if they didn't like your performance. And the most insidious part? By the time it was over, everyone involved had to live with what they'd done or failed to do. The accusers had to live with the knowledge that they'd killed innocent people. The witnesses had to live with their cowardice. The judges had to live with their incompetence. The community had to live with the memory of how quickly they'd turned into a mob. The Salem witch trials ended not because anyone came to their senses, or because justice prevailed, but because the hysteria simply burned itself out. By late 1692, the accusations were starting to target people with enough social power to fight back effectively. When the governor's wife was accused, suddenly the whole system came under scrutiny. When respected ministers started questioning the proceedings, the religious justification began to crumble. The trials officially ended in May 1693, but the damage was permanent. 20 people had been executed, hundreds had been accused, families had been destroyed, and the community's social fabric had been torn apart. The legal system had proven itself capable of mass murder based on fantasy evidence. The religious establishment had shown that it could justify anything in the name of spiritual warfare. And you? If you survived the Salem witch trials, you got to live with the knowledge that your neighbours, your friends, your family members, and your community leaders were all capable of participating in or enabling judicial murder based on dreams and teenage tantrums. You got to wake up every morning in a place where the rule of law had been replaced by supernatural paranoia, and where human decency had been sacrificed to religious extremism. That's what it really sucked to live through the Salem witch trials. Not just the poverty, disease, and hardship that defined colonial life anyway, but the additional layer of existential terror that came from living in a community that had collectively lost its mind and decided that killing people based on dreams was not only acceptable, but necessary for spiritual survival. Sweet dreams, Salem. You've earned them.